David says it's time to quit the day job and become a cuddle therapist. Just Googled it and saw they can charge up to £100 per session. Perhaps it's a lucrative career option.
We are in a cost of living crisis. I understand why people would be charging that much for a hug. Let us know what you make of that or any of the stories that we're talking about today. gbviews@gbnews.com.
But Ellie, what a wonderful segue. We are in a cost of living crisis, but inflation has fallen from 7.9% in June to 6.8% in July.
Yes, both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have said this latest consumer price index, which is the headline measure of inflation, shows that the government's plan is working.
Well, is it really? Let's get the views of Dr. Roger Gewolb, former advisor for the Bank of England. And I suppose, at face value, this is a fast fall in inflation. Is the Prime Minister right? Is the Chancellor right? Is the plan working?
No, and I think it would be a good idea if someone sent cuddles to all of them. I've been saying that this would happen for well over a year, and it's happening, and I feel like I'm living in an alternative reality. First of all, real inflation, what's called core inflation, has not fallen. As of today, it is still 6.9%. So the fight, let's curb inflation by raising interest rates, has not worked and is not working. Inflation is still where it was, 6.9%. I'm sorry?
No, please continue.
We have cost push inflation, which means non-consumer spending inflation. It's not driven by people spending. It's driven by the cost of materials and services over which people have little control, going up and then going down. In cost push inflation, all of those materials and services begin to fall by themselves. And this has been going on since wheat started to grow again in ancient biblical Egypt, and raising interest rates does nothing to stop it. They're now falling, milk, butter, bread, gas prices. Yes, but the government is crowing that they have something to do with it. They have nothing whatsoever to do with it. And in fact, their 14 interest rate rises have, I believe, prolonged the time before these inflation elements start to fall. They would have fallen earlier. So we are going to see a huge drop in inflation over time, but it is nothing to do with the Bank of England or Rishi Sunak, and they can crow about it as much as they want. But the real inflation figure is still unchanged this month, today, this morning, at 6.9%. Raising interest rates has wrecked the economy and has not helped.
Roger, would you agree that core inflation might well have more of an element of demand pull inflation, whereas that headline figure of CPI inflation perhaps is more to do with the cost push inflation, and perhaps that's why it's moving more? Would you say that there's perhaps an element of demand pull inflation here, and perhaps this is one of the concerns that the government has about all of these big public sector pay awards, that might actually keep prices a little bit higher than otherwise they would be?
It's a good argument, but I'm afraid I don't buy it with respect. The wage rises are relatively small in relation to everything else. They are also less than the rate of inflation was, certainly the CPI rate of inflation until it just fell. So that's certainly not what's driving it. And if you're talking about demand pull inflation, Tom, real consumer spending driven inflation, when you raise interest rate, that goes down fast. In America, where they do have consumer spending inflation, the Federal Reserve, their central bank, their Bank of England, if you will, raised interest rates and the inflation dropped by more than half, and it's now 3%. It worked there. It's not working here. I don't know how many times this has to happen before people listen to the thousands of economists who are saying this is just wrong. You must stop. My gosh, please don't have a 15th interest rate rise.
But do you think there will be, Roger? I mean, many people are going to be looking at this very nervously now, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that this is kind of like, it's an alternate reality. We're being told it's gaslighting. The Prime Minister and his cabinet, they'll grab anything floating by to justify what's going on. Hey, look how great we've done. Inflation is falling. And I think they'll boost that argument to keep raising interest rates because it's all they can do. If they just sit by and let core inflation drop as those other elements of CPI inflation continue to drop, and it goes back as it did naturally. I mean, in 2009, the then Bank of England did not touch interest rates. We had cost push inflation. It ran itself out a couple of years later without them changing the interest rate. But if they did that now, they would admit that they would have to admit that they have killed us with 14 interest rate rises, which were not only unnecessary, but totally ineffective.
Roger, what would you say to those who say that interest rates needed to go up at some point? We couldn't have had them at near zero levels forever. This was sort of an aberration that came around at the time of the financial crisis. Normal interest rates are not near zero.
Absolutely, totally correct. And Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, stepped into his role at the time of the pandemic. And he meant well, certainly, in trying to save the British economy. He realized the pandemic was here, things were going to be dreadful, so he left interest rates low. And even though he started to raise them in December of 2021, long before others did, he didn't raise them enough, and he didn't raise them frequently enough, and he waited too long, and then felt he had to dump all of this on us, which he doesn't. He could have just left it alone, as so many eminent economists have told him, and what's happening now would have happened by itself. And my personal theory is it would have happened a heck of a lot earlier if he had just left it alone. But he's killed off the mortgage, the property, the rental industry. He's destroyed the lives of millions of British businesses and consumers, and that is what has left us where we are. So, my goodness, I hope he doesn't do it anymore, but I fear, Ellie, that he probably will, because he's stuck in his rut now, and they can't get out of it. And with Rishi jumping up and down saying, hooray, hooray, look, we're winning, we're curbing inflation, the media and the public, this stuff is really boring to people. This isn't football. This isn't politics. And they listen to this, and CPI inflation went up and the cost push went with the governor. They really don't care. But when they get home and they open their envelope and they see, oh my God, my mortgage has gone up another £200. What the hell's going on? It hits it. It's very, very, very difficult for the average Briton.
No, well, Roger, you set it out really clearly there in terms that everyone can feel in the country at the moment. Thank you very much for your analysis this morning, Roger Gewolb, there, former advisor to the Bank of England. And
he's so right, isn't it? It's when it affects the pounds in our pockets, and when you see that bill for your mortgage going up by £200, £300, £400 a month, that's when you feel it.
Or the pint of milk that's no longer £1 and it's just 2 pints.
Basket shopping for most people. I think that's where they've been hit the most. Do let us know, actually, your response to that this morning. 6.8% inflation figure. How's that affecting you at home? Do let us know. gbnews@gbnews.com.
Well, the government has been